In 1933, beneath the floors of an ancient Mexican pyramid, archaeologists unearthed a collection of burial goods: gold, turquoise, pottery, and a Roman terracotta head. That's right, a small, seemingly insignificant artifact that shouldn't have been there, because the Roman Empire supposedly never reached the Americas. So how did it get there? Was it evidence of a lost voyage across the Atlantic, a relic of ancient transoceanic contact, or was it all just an elaborate hoax? And if the Romans, or someone else, reached Mexico long before Columbus, what else have we overlooked? History tells us that the Americas remained completely isolated from the rest of the world until 1492, when Christopher Columbus made landfall in the Caribbean. But every now and then, an artifact emerges that doesn't fit neatly into the accepted timeline. The Tecaxic-Calixtlahuaca head is one of those objects. Discovered buried beneath 3 intact floors of an ancient structure in the Toluca Valley, northwest of Mexico City, the head was surrounded by indigenous artifacts: gold, crystal, and turquoise. Everything in the burial site seemed perfectly in place, except for this small, bearded face, which looked unmistakably Roman. Archaeologist José García Payón, who led the excavation, was so baffled by the artifact that he delayed publishing any information about it for decades. And when he finally did, the questions only multiplied. How could a Roman artifact end up inside an indigenous burial site, sealed beneath layers of stone, long before Europeans officially arrived in Mexico? And if the Romans, or someone else, really did cross the Atlantic centuries before Columbus, what else might they have left behind? Welcome to Timeless Secrets Hub. Make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because today we're uncovering one of the strangest, most controversial finds in archaeological history. In 1933, during an excavation in the Tecaxic-Calixtlahuaca zone of the Toluca Valley, archaeologist José García Payón and his team unearthed a burial site beneath 3 undisturbed floors of a pyramidal structure. Among the usual grave offerings, gold, turquoise, pottery, bone, shell, and copper, there was something completely out of place. A small terracotta head. It had an unmistakably European style, with finely detailed facial features, a beard, and a headpiece that didn't match any known indigenous Mesoamerican art. The team was puzzled. The burial was dated between 1476 and 1510 AD, just before or during the very earliest European explorations of the Americas. But even if it were post-Columbian, it made no sense for a Roman artifact, likely over 1,000 years old, to be found at an indigenous burial site. José García Payón made a stunning decision. He didn't publish any information about the head for nearly 30 years. When he finally did, in 1960, the artifact immediately sparked controversy. Was it really Roman? And if so, how had it gotten to Mexico? The questions were only beginning. The artifact was initially suspected to be a modern contamination, something accidentally introduced into the excavation site. But there was a problem. The burial was sealed under 3 intact stone floors. That meant it was impossible for the artifact to have been introduced recently. The head had been in that grave since before the site was last sealed, long before Europeans officially arrived in Mexico. So researchers began considering other explanations. One of the first to seriously investigate the artifact was Romeo H. Hristoff, an archaeologist from the University of New Mexico. He sought out experts in Roman art, including Bernard Andrea, a director emeritus at the German Institute of Archaeology in Rome. Andrea's verdict? The artifact was undeniably Roman in style, most likely from the 2nd or 3rd century AD. The head's distinctive hairstyle and beard matched those of statues from the time of the Severan emperors, who ruled from 193 to 235 AD. This meant the artifact was nearly 1,200 years older than the burial in which it was found. Even more baffling, a thermoluminescence test performed in 1995 confirmed that the terracotta had been fired sometime between the 9th century BC and the 13th century AD. In other words, it definitely wasn't a modern forgery. So if it was truly an ancient Roman artifact, how did it end up in Mexico? Could the Romans, or some other Mediterranean civilization, have made contact with the Americas over 1,000 years before Columbus? Or was there another explanation? Once the artifact became public knowledge, theories spread quickly. Researchers and amateur historians alike proposed three main possibilities. The first theory, a lost Roman voyage to the Americas. Bristoff and other researchers suggested that the artifact could be evidence of a forgotten transatlantic voyage. The Roman Empire had a vast maritime network, and we know that Roman ships reached places as far as India and sub-Saharan Africa. If a Roman vessel had been blown off course, perhaps by a storm, could it have drifted across the Atlantic and landed somewhere in the Americas? Some historians believe this isn't entirely impossible. There is evidence of Roman, Phoenician, and Berber contact with the Canary Islands as early as the 5th or 6th century BC, and a confirmed Roman trading post from the 1st century BC was discovered in Lanzarote, one of the Canary Islands. If the Romans, or even earlier Mediterranean traders, were reaching the Canaries, could one of them have been swept further west, landing in the Americas? If so, what happened to them? And if the Tecaxic-Calixtlahuaca head is proof of an ancient Roman expedition, why haven't we found more evidence? The second theory, a Viking souvenir. Another theory suggests that the head didn't arrive with the Romans, but instead came with the Vikings. We know the Norse reached North America around the year 1000 AD, establishing settlements in Vinland, modern-day Newfoundland, Canada. The Vikings were notorious for taking artifacts from other cultures, both as souvenirs and as plunder. Some researchers suggest that a Viking, having acquired the Roman head somewhere in Europe, brought it to the Americas and eventually left it in Mexico. But if that's true, why haven't we found any solid Viking artifacts in Mexico? The third theory, an elaborate hoax. Perhaps the simplest explanation is that the artifact was planted at the site, either as a joke or as an attempt to fabricate evidence of early transatlantic contact. Some accounts claim that an archaeologist named Hugo Moedano may have placed the head there to play a prank on Jose Garcia Payon, the head of the excavation. However, there's no direct evidence of this. Payon's own son insists that his father was present when the head was discovered, ruling out the idea that it was secretly introduced later. If it was a hoax, it must have been an extremely well-executed one, involving an ancient Roman artifact, a deep burial under an intact pyramid, and a perfectly timed deception. So which theory holds up? Could this small, unassuming terracotta head rewrite history, or is there another explanation waiting to be uncovered? Each theory surrounding the Tecaxic-Calixtlahuaca head presents a fascinating possibility, but all of them come with serious problems. If it was part of a Roman voyage, why has no other physical evidence surfaced to support it? No Roman coins, no tools, no wrecked ships, just this single isolated artifact. If the Romans had reached the Americas, wouldn't there be more traces of their presence? If the head was brought over by the Vikings, why has no one found Norse artifacts in Mexico? The Vikings settled in Newfoundland, Canada, but we've never found signs of their presence further south. And why would a Viking bury a Roman artifact in an indigenous tomb? And if it was planted as a hoax, where did the artifact come from in the first place? The thermoluminescence testing confirmed that it wasn't a modern object, it was genuinely ancient. Would a hoaxer really go to the trouble of sourcing a legitimate 2nd century Roman artifact just to prank an archaeologist? And then there's the final, most frustrating question of all. If the head was already old when it was buried, how did it get into a sealed, undisturbed grave in the 15th century? There's no evidence of modern tampering, no gaps in the burial's timeline. So if it was placed there centuries ago, who did it? And more importantly, why? Could we be looking at the single most overlooked clue to an ancient, undocumented voyage across the Atlantic? Or is this just another historical puzzle with no real solution? Despite all the speculation, one fact remains unchanged. The Tecaxic-Calixtlahuaca head should not exist where it was found. So what's the most likely answer? Most historians still believe that the head was somehow introduced to the burial site after it was sealed, possibly through a crack in the structure, or by an unknown act of disturbance. However, the excavation notes from 1933 do not report any such disturbances, leaving this as a weak argument. The hoax theory is still debated, but without hard evidence, it remains unproven. If it was planted, It was done exceptionally well, with an actual Roman artifact buried at the perfect depth. Could the Romans have actually crossed the Atlantic? While there's no definitive proof, history is full of unexplained gaps. The discovery of a Roman trading post in the Canary Islands suggests that their ships were capable of reaching the far western Atlantic. Perhaps a lost vessel, caught in a storm, drifted farther than anyone ever imagined. Or perhaps the head made its way to Mexico much later, brought by an unknown traveler, acquired through unknown means. At the end of the day, we may never know. What we do know is that the Tecaxic-Calixtlahuaca head remains one of archaeology's strangest unsolved mysteries. A single artifact that defies explanation, buried in a place where it shouldn't exist. And if this one object can challenge everything we thought we knew about ancient history, what else could still be waiting to be discovered? This is just one of many cases where history leaves us with more questions than answers. Do you think the Tecaxic-Calixtlahuaca head is proof of a lost transatlantic voyage, a Viking souvenir, or just an elaborate hoax? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed diving into this mystery, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more deep dives into history's greatest enigmas. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep searching for the timeless secrets hidden in our past.